We almost have everyone back to the table. Matthew and Alec, first of all, thank you so much for hooking us up with the Climate Change Commission and organising that. It was very advantageous that they were here today, but I think it was very valuable, and I'm sure it helped you and Matthew with writing notes for the submission process. So thank you.
Kia ora koutou. I'm Matthew Blakey, Principal Specialist Climate Mitigation within the Chief Sustainability Office, and I'm joined by Alec Tang, Auckland Council's Chief Sustainability Officer. Before we start, I'd like to say thank you to the Chair, Deputy Chair and Chief Executive of the Climate Change Commission for their time today. Thank you. The reason we're here to present to you is to seek authority for delegated sign-off of our submission on the Climate Change Commission's draft advice to government. We are currently reviewing the draft advice. We have not yet started preparing our submission. We have a workshop scheduled for tomorrow with members of Auckland Council and CCOs to gain input for our submission. So in summary, I'd like to just outline the framing in which we're considering our submission. So there are a number of key areas of focus. So firstly, we will be looking at the Climate Change Commission's draft advice to understand the alignment between the Commission's draft advice and Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, Auckland's climate plan. Where there are differences between the advice and our own climate plan, we will be considering why and looking into that. The extent to which the Commission's draft supports Auckland's climate goals is clearly central to how we will be looking at the advice, and we've heard about the reason for that this morning. We know through the development of Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, Auckland's climate plan, that central government policies and interventions will be required for Auckland to achieve its climate goals. We therefore need to look at this very closely to understand if there are any gaps, if there are any areas in which recommended policies and interventions perhaps don't go far enough in our opinion. So we need to ask the question, does the draft advice recommend policies and interventions that will adequately support Auckland to deliver on its climate goals? The overall direction of the submission will be informed by Auckland Council's climate change commitments. We've already made those, they are clear and have already been stated. We will also be looking at previous relevant consultation submissions, such as Auckland Council's submission on the Climate Change Response Zero Carbon Amendment Bill, where we clearly stated positions on climate. In terms of the timeframes and opportunity for elected member input, as is often the case with government submissions, timeframes are tight. So we are here today on the 11th of February. By the 23rd of February, we are proposing that a draft submission is circulated to all elected members. And we are proposing that by the 2nd of March, there is a deadline for elected members to provide feedback for it to be considered for incorporation into the final submission. On the 10th of March, we are proposing that the submission is signed off by delegated elected members. The consultation window closes on the 14th of March, which is a Sunday. The 19th of March, we will be circulating the submission to all elected members, the final submission. Within those timeframes, there is obviously opportunity for local board input. We have communicated with all 19 iwi chairs to flag the opportunity for input into our submission, and also flag the opportunity for iwi chairs to provide to produce their own submission if they so wish. And we've also sent a memo to the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum flagging the opportunity for input into the submission. That is my final slide. Would welcome any questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Member Wilson.
Kia ora, thank you very much. I'm looking to see on the timeline, rather than verbally listening, where the close-off date for mana whenua submissions would fit there, rather than we're just flagging it to them. I think there's been many occasions where I've indicated you need more to do more than flag or send an email, given the nature of the support that was given te taruki a tāwhiri. So I would expect to see in there some timing around mana whenua submissions. I would also expect to see some measure of potentially technical support that would be provided to ensure there was meaningful input into something that's quite complex, as we've discovered through this committee. So can you advise me if those can be progressed, please?
So through the chair, to answer the first part of your question, the timeframes you see there are a condensed version. There is a longer version which clearly identifies the 9th of March being the date in which mana whenua input can be provided to be appended to council submission. So that provides an opportunity for that to be appended as it is presented. And that applies to both the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum, but also to all 19 iwi as well. The communication has gone out to. In terms of the measure of technical support, the second part of your question, when you mention that, when you speak to the measure in terms of how that technical support will be inputted into the submission, just to clarify what exactly is meant by that.
It's meant that clearly for mana whenua to A, be advised, and C, have access to the ability to put submission, that they would need to understand the nature of what that submission may be based on, what council's doing. All those sorts of things take some measure of technical support to enable that to happen quite quickly, as it does with other submissions that have been...
Member Wilson, if I just jump in, obviously, and you may or may not have seen the note I sent out this morning, always happy and welcome to provide that input and advice to mana whenua. We are a team of now 6 people, where we were 10, 11 people a couple of years ago when we started this process. So our ability to respond is affected in that way. The door is always open, and I'm always happy to have that conversation directly with mana whenua. We have also, as Matthew noted, provided the similar outreach through the forum as well.
Thank you for that. I heard no from the kōrero, and that there's is that a yes or a no in terms of the support that was being sought?
I'm happy to answer that. The answer will be we are not able to resource, for example, 19 iwi in this time frame individually. We will not be able to resource that technically. We will provide our own draft of the submission, and if any of them wish to call or contact us, we will certainly try and explain that, but we do not have resources to provide full technical support to iwi.
So just one final, I guess, when we refer to taruki a tāwhiri, I'm not sure how that applies to what's being sought here, which is equitable access to information to allow submission. So I would leave that there as a query through you, Mr. Chair. If we are continuing to refer to this through at least 3 items that has a te ao Māori on there, there's a bit of a disconnect on how that's actually enabled. And we've been talking about empowering and enabling. So I'll leave that as a query and also leave that as a query for our Secretariat to see what is being provided. Everything, just one more point, everything is always on a tight time frame. So that provides no comfort whatsoever. And lack of resource, you're talking about your own staff, whereas I'm talking about iwi that always have little in the way of resource. I see that as no excuse whatsoever for providing something that is pretty basic if you're wanting to input into these things. I would have accepted potentially something in the way of the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum if you were shot, but no, there's nothing. I think that's unacceptable.
We will definitely take that feedback on and find out what more we can provide in the government's timeframe to get the submission in. Thank you, Member Wilson. Member Wilcox.
One's a short one. Elected members also includes IMSP members, does it not?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
I'm a little bit confused about. I'm just looking at item 8, where it says the draft advice for consultation, because there's no draft that I can find here. So, are we only commenting on those 5 points, 4 points? Because what I wanted to talk about was, yeah, so it's number 8, draft advice for consultation. So you just want us to talk about the biogenic methane, whether the nationally determined contribution is compatible, the first emissions reduction plan, which I've been trying to Google, I can't find it. Is that in that? It's not in the.
So through the chair, point 8 there in the item on the agenda, that's the structure of the draft advice.
Right,
so
but we can put anything we like in.
We can put anything we like in. The Climate Change Commission has outlined their 6 big issues, and there's a question relating to each of those, and there's
Okay,
24
good. So
questions.
what then? Okay, well, I think I'm relevant then. So it's talking about the built form, which was alluded to that, to me, I don't think the NPS urban development statement is actually relevant. It doesn't actually deliver on this because it's talking a lot about sprawl and greenfields. And so how do we address that in this? Because if we've got a national policy statement that's saying, no, it's fine, just keep spreading out, how is that going to meet our targets if we're not, and we're forced into, reflecting that in what we do? I suppose roundabout way, how does this subcommittee and you put that in there that says, look, if we really want to meet these, we need to have that statement directing us rather than letting us and allowing all over the country to just do whatever they like, basically. We can still sprawl, we're not concentrating our development. Those are the things that I'm concerned about, because that's really long term. What we invest in now, if we keep doing that, it condemns us to continuing to do that and then having to provide the public transport, which we don't have the money for, all of those sorts of things. So is it relevant to reflect those concerns in there? Because that's one of the things that the Climate Change Commission has brought up, isn't it? The built form, and also the Auckland issue, which we've got a big issue of still spreading out.
So although our submission is not yet prepared or written, I certainly expect that to be an area of focus.
Thank you. Nice short answer for a rambling.
No, and if I know we got a lot of information yesterday come through, but at 11:45 yesterday, so the 2 attachments that Suad sent out there, one of the attachment is the consultation questions that the Commission want us to answer, which might help narrow some of what we give as feedback. And there's obviously the draft advice, which is 180 pages, but you might not have had a chance.
All due respect, Mr. Chair, when we get that stuff and then we're in a meeting all day, and then we've got things to do after that on council business, how do we read that stuff in full? I'm just saying. So that's why I'm kind of a bit confused, because I haven't had time to do all that.
Absolutely, and I was just saying for future reference, while it's we'll be asked for our own individual feedback. Normally, a process would be that a draft would come to this committee, but because of the government's timeframes, we don't have time. That's why. Yeah. Good, thank you, Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. Will you work with Auckland Transport to give this submission a transport focus?
Through the chair, so currently all CCOs are involved and attending the workshop tomorrow, so I certainly expect to be working with Auckland Transport and our transport strategy team to give the submission a strong transport focus.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, not here. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. that was just a really engaging session with Dr. Carr and his colleagues, and so thank you for whatever went on behind the scenes to make that happen. And also I thought the questions, wasn't really a dud question amongst everyone around the table, which and it just drew out some really good things and responses that I'm hoping we'll be able to capture to feed into the submission as well. So I guess my question is, and particularly I was interested in what we were hearing about the opportunity to set out what we see the enablers and the barriers are, particularly around the government policy and what we need from government. So I just wanted, so my question is, do you see that we can do that within the submission and capture some of that really juicy content that we had out in that session? I think that was kind of kicked off by Councillor Newman's question, and lots of different issues came out in terms of particularly what the barriers are. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Councillor Newman. Oh, sorry. I thought you looked at me as a...
Through the chair, as pointed out by Dr. Rod Carr, and I would certainly agree that that should be a strong focus of our submission. For those of you that may not have seen the questions yet, question 8 of the specific questions relates to central and local government working in partnership, and they put forward a enabling recommendation for that. So there is a specific question we can respond to and that we can capture the discussion today, but also look at that more specifically in terms of elements of council, elements of the region where actually specific interventions, partnerships need to be put in place. So I would think that would be a strong focus for our work going forward for the submission. Yeah.
The clarification just about how we're going to have input from other stakeholders into our own submission. There's interest from the advisory panels as well. I know particularly the Deputy Mayor and the Rural Advisory Panel. How's that going to work in terms of the timeline and how we can take on board that feedback?
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, it's a really good point, and obviously this whole topic is of lots of interest to a whole bunch of different advisory panels. We're just working through exactly how and what is the most appropriate format to capture and integrate where practical through that. I would say and reiterate that the importance here is people having their say. I mean, obviously we are providing a submission as council, but there are lots of different groups that have different perspectives, and for them to have their say directly to the Commission is really important as well.
Councillor Newman.
Chapter 4B of the Commission's feedback to government sets this matter out, and there must be a poultice of information and research that the Council has to justify the objectives and policy statement of the Auckland Unitary Plan, the RPS provisions. Central government's direction is completely at variance with that. So in our submission, we will need to address that palpable disconnect between where we're trying to go and where the government is going, because it's in a completely different direction. We're going up and in, the government is just going all over the place. So do you have any empirical evidence to support the costs involved with this urban sprawl that government is promoting, what the impact of that would be in terms of the higher emissions, the cost, and can you capture that concisely for that submission? Because that, to me, is at the nub of what we need to be addressing. We don't have the money to fund the transformation, to a low emissions world. Wish we did. We have got a little bit of money, but we don't have much. But we do have some planning tools. But to me, those planning tools are being eviscerated by a central government planning focus, which is going in the opposite direction. So can you capture that? Because we need to address the cost of that in our submission.
Through the chair, we'll certainly be looking to flag tensions in our submission, and the example you've given is a good one. Tensions between, for example, existing policy, whether that be central government policy or otherwise, and the Climate Change Commission's advice. Also, tensions between central government policy and perhaps regional policy. Where we have evidence to support a position, we will of course be providing that or pointing towards it. In terms of your particular points around the costs involved in urban sprawl and the implications on emissions, we are looking to draw on areas of council that have that expertise, such as the Chief Economist Unit, our transport strategy team. We're looking at emissions modelling work that we've done to pull together all the evidence and knowledge we have in these areas. So we will be presenting that and providing it to the Commission in the best way we can, assuming that we have that evidence.
I think that you're being too nuanced. It's more than a tension. It's a direct cost that falls on some of the least resilient communities, certainly the council, and the government isn't picking up the tab for this. So it needs to be a cost that the minister is going to quantify. The cost of the urban sprawl, we need to be saying that firstly, the direction that the Commission is saying is correct, and we support that. We're trying to give effect to that, but the direction that government is setting in terms of greenfields urban sprawl is wrong, and it's expensive, and we need to declare that. It needs to be a declaratory statement in our submission. It's more than a tension, because we can always live with tensions in our lives, but we actually need to quantify those costs and say to government, this is why you're wrong.
Just to clarify, yes, we know we have some costs, and particularly in relation to infrastructure and greenfield. So yes, we can mould that in with the work the team's doing. Yep.
And on what Councillor Newman is saying, because you obviously have to write the submission based on our current plans and policies that we've already passed, you can't. Would you be able to talk about how the Climate Commission's advice to government is at odds with their plans? Or seems to be, because it would also be in odds with our Auckland plan and Auckland unitary plan, some of what they say.
Yeah, I think that goes to the point that the Commissioner made, and I think Councillor Cooper has made about making sure we articulate the barriers, and that is a barrier.
Thank you. Member Wilcox.
Yes, sorry, look, I hadn't really understood this paper. Well, I'm going down to number 7, and it's in relation to Megan's response that actually we just don't have the staff. And number 7 is genuine, active and enduring partnership with iwi Māori. I'm not familiar with section 263. But I mean, there's a real case there for advocating on behalf of the council or on behalf of iwi, that actually saying it and doing it are two different things. And like Councillor Newman, someone's got to stump up with the cost. And like you said, you've been reduced from 10 to 6. There again shows that we just can't afford to do this. So is our submission going to reflect this? That unless government stumps up, we're kind of just saying the words but not able to produce the goods.
If I just jump in, look, yes, of course there are things that we need central government to do, and I think that was talked about quite a bit in the session with the Commissioner. I think often, and actually in the draft, sorry, this goes into the draft advice a little bit, but what the draft advice doesn't have, and something that I feel we should talk about more, is the cost of inaction. Is the fact that this isn't like we don't do this and it's okay, we carry on and the world's good. If we don't take action, then actually the costs of repairing the flood damage, the storm damage, all those kind of things, they all stack up. So that needs to be part of our submission, part of the discussion as well. So just to talk about one side, which, it's great, the Commission sees it as an affordable option, but actually the cost of not doing it as well needs to play in.
Yeah, and I understand that completely. But if you've got a partner that can't engage because they don't have the technical advice, I mean, the partnership is kind of not a partnership. And I think it's really important to bring that out. Because, like I said, like we heard, you've dropped from 10 to 6. we can't supply the technical, we may not be able to supply the technical advice they require to understand this. Like I said, I haven't read it, so I don't understand it completely myself. So how are we going to kind of do that in our submission? Because I think that's what I'd be looking for, is to say, well, we're unable to do this, we may not be able to do what you're requiring unless you provide the resources. Because it's always the case, the government makes the rules and then the council's paying.
Apologies. I think that's a valid point that we can make in the submission.
I think it's also this is us commenting on the advice to government's partnership, so that it's also about ensuring that we agree with that they are going to do this, which inevitably that also includes us. But yeah. Councillor Walker.
A couple of things. I've certainly been familiarising myself with, what's going on here, and there may be other, and no doubt other councillors. I'd very much like to put some feedback in well before the 23rd of February, because we've just got an incredibly tight time frame. So I just put to you, Mr. Chair, it would be desirable to have a process that enables as many of us to engage as possible. I toss that in. The other concern that I've got, and this is a suggestion and it goes to resourcing. The first gestation of the Council's Climate Action Plan was done collaboratively. There was a phenomenal amount of technical expertise that we tapped into in the wider community. Given the circumstance we've got, we're across council, we've sometimes got units like the sustainability unit that are massively under-resourced. We need to have a different way of doing things. The preparedness around that needs to be thought through in advance, identifying people. People will help. There are technical people that will help. It's just a matter of projectising them, going out, identifying who they are, and many of these people are already up to speed. I could make some suggestions around some people, no doubt others can, so that we can actually deliver on stuff, but not be constrained by the resources of our council. It goes not only to this issue, but a whole range of issues. So I make that as a suggestion.
Definitely as a point, but I'm not sure it's a question for Matthew and Alec. And
the question is, can we do that?
Well, my answer is that we have, through the emergency budget, put a hold on FTE, and they've had Sarah and Nita, a number of staff that were working on this, have left, and they aren't allowed, by virtue of the emergency budget at this point, to employ numbers of staff as quick as we'd like to. That's across the whole of council, because we've asked the council to save $120 million.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, when we had the first gestation of the Climate Action Plan, we had 1.5 FTEs. So basically, I helped put together a structure that identified hundreds of additional FTEs to deal with the problem. There are people out there that can help that go beyond our own FTEs across a number of things, and it's just a matter of how we tap into that. And I know some people may shrug and despair, but that's what we've got to do.
It's very operational, and I know that personal conversations with the team, they wish they had more resource, but they cannot control that. Maybe Megan could answer.
Look, I just think, let's just remember, this is advice being given to government and we're being asked to comment on it. The technical matters, there's a whole bunch of technical material in that the Commission has done. In this particular case, we don't have to redo that or do any particular technical analysis beyond like we are doing for modelling and other things which we continue to do for transport and other parts of our business here in council. So the focus here is to read and understand, and clearly we need some expertise on that, and then to try and capture council's positions, questions or comments around the advice being given. So while that is useful, and of course we can talk to others, it may not be required from a technical matter in the same way as other parts and other submissions and documents have been in the past. So this is slightly different, but I thank you for your advice around that. That's helpful.
Yeah, and we can only the staff can only base our submissions on subject matter from our previous plans and previous policies that we've already approved as a council. They can't choose new information out of nowhere. Are there any other questions on this one? Member Wilson.
Sorry, it may be that suffering from a little bit of confusion as to what was being sought. So if I can just make sure that that was well understood. I understand the need for the submission. I understand that the submission is coming from Auckland Council. I understand that the Commission itself has provided guidelines. I understand that some of those guidelines are in the form of a question, a consultation question, and they're listed here. What my question was, which led to the technical, there's a question in there that's highly unlikely that Auckland Council would be able to answer. That is, genuine, active and enduring partnership with iwi Māori, section 2.6.3. Then it's got underneath it, do you support enabling recommendation 3? How does Council answer that? Because it goes towards, even if you did it separately as an iwi, that would inform. So it's not because it's technical, it's someone that does the writing as was offered in terms of the long-term plan and the like, because it pertains to a specific question that I'm assuming may or may not be answered in the Council's submission. I would think that's not a question that could be answered adequately, or it may be omitted, worse. So there's two opportunities, one would assume, for iwi Māori to have input into the Council submission, specifically around that question, and therefore iwi could also do a separate one. It's supporting the notion thereof. That was the nature of my question. It's not technical. It is someone that does the writing based on the words that come out of your mouth, which is what has been happening for the last 2 or 3 years. I did not accept no for an answer because it has been done before, and it's specific to consultation questions that have been posed and recommended by the Commission. That's the nature of why I was advocating for what I was advocating for.
To that, I suppose, you know, of course we would like that input, and that's the offer that's been made. And as I said, if it involves me sitting down, when I have time, which I will make time, to come and have that conversation directly with iwi chairs, or with Mana Whenua, Kaitaki Forum, we're having that discussion about their availability, then of course we will do that.
Mayor Goff.
Yeah, just briefly, there's a long list of consultation questions here that I guess you're going to be focused on because that creates the structure for you to answer. But I think somewhere in it, we've got to pick up some of what Rod Carr said about the Auckland context. I might be telling you to suck eggs, sorry if I am, but just how important Auckland is. And the other thing that he said that we actually don't do very often, we sit and moan and bitch that we don't have the resources, but we never tell our story about what we are doing. And, you know, we can say there may be stuff in the National Policy Statement that would take us beyond what we believe is appropriate in terms of sprawl, having regard for the fact that things like Drury are in our Auckland Unitary Plan and catered for. But, you know, just how far Auckland has come, and that in the context of not going too slow, but also understanding what people are absorbing in terms of a whole change in their lifestyle. We've moved from the quarter-acre section to the fifth-acre section to 2/3 of our stuff being apartments and terrace housing. I just think we need to create some of the context about what we are doing, and then obviously the context of how important Auckland is, the context of how important transport is to Auckland, and then his thing about the advocacy. You know, there are things we can't do but are vital to what we want, such as the incentivisation of electrification of our car fleet. What I'm really worried about is that if we go through the structure of 24 separate questions, it becomes a very technical document, and what we have to do is put the politics into it and the stuff that we can then take out to the public and say, this is what we're asking for, this is what we're already doing, and this is why we need the help. So, you know, maybe through you, Mr. Chairman, we do need that. It's not just a technical submission, please, because it'll be buried and nobody will ever notice it. It needs to have the political context, particularly around the importance of Auckland, particularly around the importance of transport, and actually what we have done and where we need government help to do more on that.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Cooper.
Yeah, sorry, a process issue. We had decided that we would not grill staff, that we would go through you, and I'm just noticing, you know, a lot of stuff about, oh, we haven't got enough resources. Well, it's not the staff's fault, and so we're kind of putting it on them, and I notice a discomfort from our staff having that happen. So I just ask, Mr. Chair, that we revert to what we decided, which was to speak through you and give that advice.
Yes, thank you. And this way, this is focus on questions, and then as we go into the debate, the staff will move away from the table. But we have got into a bit of
The thing is, we're
comment.
getting into comment and criticism.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cooper. Are there any other questions on the submission process? Cool. Well, thank you, Alec. Thank you, Matthew. I'll move the recommendations, which are... I just can't see them. Yeah. Delegate authority to the chair, deputy chair, and an independent Māori statutory board member to approve Auckland Council's submission on the Climate Change Commission's draft advice to government. Note that the final submission will be provided to the Environment and Climate Change Committee for information. Thank Dr. Rod Carr, Chair, Climate Change Commission, Lisa Tumahai, Deputy Chair, Climate Change Commission, and Joe Hendy, CEO of Climate Change Commission, for their attendance. I probably didn't need to read all that out. Apologies. Councillor Coombe will second. Are there anyone who would like to speak to the item? Thank you. So all those in favour? Those opposed? Thank you very much. And now we have